What I focused on in recent years is terrorism, the challenge of terrorist violence to really all societies around the world, as well as the challenge of how to counter terrorism within a rule of law framework. Obviously, terrorism abuses human rights, but counter-terrorism can also severely erode human rights in our societies as well. So trying to figure out the way in which law can prevent terrorism from arising, how law can be used to deal with terrorism, but also how law can be used to hold accountable states, governments which abuse human rights in the name of countering terrorism. I think thinking of the law in Australia, certainly that would be the need for a Bill of Rights in Australia. Australia is one of the last democracies on the planet which doesn't have a constitutional or statutory Bill of Rights. The law most of the time deals with what the majority wants pretty well. People in positions of power usually get what they want out of the law, but it's really the marginalised, the vulnerable, those who are disempowered in our society who really don't get what they need out of the law. A Bill of Rights allows you to claim your rights when they're violated by governments, to hold governments accountable for violations of public power. And just to give you one example, I also practice as a barrister. Recently I've been representing over 50 asylum seekers, people recognised as refugees in Australia, who've been indefinitely detained in administrative detention by the Australian government for almost 5 years. A number of those refugees have attempted suicide because they find their life is so hopeless in detention. They're refugees. They've been called national security threats by the government, but the government's given them no information about why they're security risks. They haven't been able to challenge it in a fair process or been given a fair hearing or due process in the courts. And so they're really stuck in this limbo where they face spending the rest of their lives in detention without charge or trial in circumstances which is inflicting severe mental illness on them. I took this case to the United Nations Human Rights Committee in Geneva. The committee found that Australia was violating international law, 150 breaches of international law, and we're still waiting for the Australian government's response. So I think if you had a Bill of Rights in Australia, that wouldn't happen. You could take the government to court and get them released from detention if it's not lawful, or at least get them a fair process, a fair hearing, so that they can answer the allegations against them. So Australia is a pretty is really an outlier country in terms of the international system on human rights.